everyone, I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Sandy.
And this is the Italian American Stories podcast. Okay, so we are back for part 2 of the Axeman victims.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we recorded last week's episode, and then I was writing the script for this episode, and I realized how repetitive this all is. You know, we do 3 families in each story, or in each episode. It's almost exactly the same in every story.
Yeah, but that's the Axeman's way.
True.
Always Italians and always Italian grocery store owners.
That's a good point.
That's just his way.
Has to be.
It does sound repetitive, but...
Exactly, yeah, because you're right. You know, it was Italian-American grocery store owners. They were asleep in the middle of the night.
Oh, yeah.
Yep. Right. Attacked with a meat cleaver or an axe or something. Right. So, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there if you're listening and you're like, this feels like the last story.
Yeah.
But like Mom said, it kind of has to be because...
Right, that was his way.
Yeah, that's how he, broke in the middle of the night and the same victims every time. So, however, this episode, the last story, will have a little bit of a twist. So, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so, like I said before, we're going to talk about 3 more families today. We're going to start with the Chambras, then go to the Andalinas, and end with the Maggios. So, let's go ahead and dive on into this. Like I said, we're going to start with the Chambras. And Anthony Chambra, he was born on August 17th, 1885 in New Orleans. And his parents came to America in 1884 from Sicily. In Anthony's younger years, he worked as a clerk for an Italian shoe store, worked really hard, and he kind of saved up his money, and then he was able to open up his own grocery store. He actually ended up leasing the building for his grocery store just a couple of months before he married his wife. And so his wife was Giovanna Montaloni, and they were married on June 28th, 1910. And it's interesting because she actually went by Johanna. So we'll call her Johanna from here on out. And she was born on January 22nd, 1889. So the couple, they had a baby boy, and they named the baby Jake Anthony Chambra. But, of course, tragedy will strike, and around 2 a.m. on Tuesday, May 16th, 1912, someone broke into the building and attacked the couple. So this attack, it is just a little bit different from the previous ones. The couple, they were actually shot with a revolver, not attacked with an axe.
Oh.
Yeah. But the police and the authorities, they do connect this to the same string of attacks. And we'll kind of get into how that happens, but really interesting, right?
Right, because we were just saying.
I know. That's right. We were just saying.
He's never used a gun.
Never used a gun. It's always been some sort of blunt object.
Right.
So... But the intruder entered the house by climbing on soap boxes that were stacked outside of the house. So the intruder made his way to the bedroom, and he removed the mosquito netting around the bed and began firing. And so Johanna, she woke up when she heard the first bullet or the first shot go off, and she actually thought it was lightning. I can imagine you wake up and you're like, lightning, thunder, and
right.
And she told Anthony that she was scared, and she said she kind of heard him mumble something. And then she heard the continuous gunfire, and she knew something was wrong. So the coroner actually said that the killer walked over to where Joseph was sleeping and put the gun right against his back. So he was sleeping on his side and just fired right into his back.
Oh, boy.
I know. And so he fell off the bed and landed on the floor, and he was killed immediately. He was only 27 years old. So Johanna, they actually didn't fire the gun at her, but she was struck by one of the bullets. And this is crazy. So the bullet went through the back of Anthony and went through him and entered into her left hip.
Oh, boy.
I know. She said that when she kind of woke up and knew what was going on, she threw the baby towards the top of the bed. And by doing this, she probably saved the baby's life. Because like I said, the baby was completely fine. Okay, so it sounds like the way the bedroom is set up, the bed was like pushed against a wall. And so Joseph was sleeping on the outside. Johanna was in the middle. And then she had the baby between her and the wall.
Oh.
The baby was definitely out of the way. So once the intruder left, she went to the window and just started screaming for help. And the neighbors, they immediately started a search in the neighborhood for the murderer. And the paper said that the police, this kind of makes me laugh, the police soon joined them. It's just such a different world,
They
you know?
wandered over.
Yeah, they're like, hey, we'll join your search. Anthony's father, he heard of the attack at the house and he rushed over to check on them and see what was happening. And the police, they wouldn't let him in because he was just so upset. They were like, you don't want to go in. You don't want to see this. And baby Jake, he was sent to Johanna's mother, and Johanna's brother, he actually came over to the house as well because he owned a grocery store just down the road from them. The newspaper said it was so close, it was a stone's throw away. There's just so many grocery stores.
I mean, that's good that they could all make money on
it. It's just, but it's crazy how many there are.
Yeah, the neighborhood must have been packed.
That's true. Yeah. And so he rushed over to the house, but, they wouldn't let him in either. But they did question him, and he wasn't able to offer any clues as to what happened. They were kind of hoping maybe he had heard something since he was so close. But he said he didn't hear anything. But he told the police that him and Anthony were really close. And, this makes sense. They were about the same age. They owned a grocery store. Anthony was married to his sister. The police, they immediately jumped to the Black Hand. And this one, to me, kind of feels like that because there's the gun involved and they just went after Joseph. I'm sorry, they just went after Anthony. I'm getting all of these names messed up. So I see why they jumped to that.
Right.
The police, they believed actually that there were two assailants. They think that only one man entered the home, but the other man stayed outside to keep watch.
Well, that sounds more like the Black Hand there, too.
It does, versus just like one creepy guy, breaking into a home. And nothing was stolen from the house, so... But when the police were able to question Johanna at the hospital, she wasn't able to offer any clues. She was just really confused and fuzzy about the events. And you got to think about this. This probably happened very fast because shooting a gun is probably faster than hitting somebody with something.
Yeah, probably a minute or so.
Exactly. And it was dark. And she was also trying to protect her baby. So, she probably didn't even look at the person really. But after talking to some of the neighbors, the police learned that Anthony, he did turn store credit down to a couple of people. So, he owned the grocery store. People would come in and say, hey, can I have a line of credit? And he told them no. So the police were kind of thinking, well, that could be a lead. Maybe they were upset about it. But after they followed up, they really got nowhere on that. They also found out that another Italian grocery store owner, he came forward and he said that he was pretty sure someone had tried to break into his house in his grocery store that same night that the Chambras were attacked. Because he woke up in the morning and he could tell that somebody had messed with his door and one of his windows. But to me, the attack on Anthony feels so personal. So I don't know.
Yeah, planned out, especially if there was two of them.
And a gun is just so different.
And the other guy didn't say that he had received a letter from the Black Hand or
Not that I read. So it almost makes you wonder, was the Axeman trying to break into this other grocery store? And, this was also happening? You never know. Simultaneously. Yeah. Kind of creepy, and a customer of the Chambras grocery store came forward with an interesting story also. She said that she was outside of the grocery store one day and she was just talking with Anthony and Johanna, and two Italian men approached the grocery store. And one of the Italian men looked at Johanna and said, "Good morning, Mrs. Tony." And that doesn't seem too odd to me, but the way that the neighbor described it, she said it was just a very kind of weird, creepy way he said it and the way he was looking at her. And then Anthony turned to his wife and said, "Go into the store. Let me talk to them." So the neighbor was just kind of offering it up. It was just it just gave me the creeps, she just thought it was a weird situation.
Say Mrs. Tony because his name's Anthony?
I think so. Yeah.
Or maybe he went by Tony.
He probably, that's true.
Yeah, and so they just,
But before we move on, remember the phrase Mrs. Tony, because that will come up in our last case.
Oh, wow.
This is different. This is a little different, yeah. I know we start the podcast episode off, we're like, this is going to be the same. It's going to repeat over and over. And now we're like, this is so different. But, it does feel repetitive in its own ways. So the police, they also heard another rumor that Anthony, he had actually almost sold his store to another Italian man. And this was about a year before the attack happened. But he ended up changing his mind last minute. And so the police were thinking, well, maybe that other Italian man was upset because he really wanted to have that store. But as they looked into it, they realized that the guy had really no hard feelings over the failed transaction. But when the police pressed Johanna on why Anthony wanted to sell the grocery store, she told them that Anthony had found out that there were some relatives living in the area who were related to a convict who was serving time in prison for trying to bomb a local Italian grocery store.
Oh.
And do you know who that convict was?
Not right offhand.
Not right offhand. So we're going to go back a little bit to Esther Albano. And it was the man that she killed, Joseph Mumfree.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, because remember, Joseph Mumfree and Esther, they grew up and lived in New Orleans until they both moved to California. And Joseph was not a great guy. And he had tried to bomb an Italian grocery store.
Oh.
And so Anthony...
So this is tied together.
It's kind of tied together. So Anthony found out that some of Joseph's relatives lived in kind of the same area that he had his grocery store. And he was scared of Joseph. And he probably thought, oh my gosh, when Joseph gets out of prison, he may move back here. And he's already threatened other people who have grocery stores. But he ended up changing his mind and keeping the store. But what a weird connection, right?
Right.
So strange.
There's a lot of weird things back to that story of Joseph
Mumfree. I know.
He was a bad guy.
He was a really bad guy. He seemed to have his fingers in everything, which again kind of screams Black Hand a little bit.
Right.
So
yeah, you're right.
It's just a little. It's just, and what a weird connection. When I was reading that, I was like, oh my gosh, hello Esther Albano story, welcome back.
Yeah.
So the Italian colony, they were in a complete uproar after this attack because they considered this the fourth targeted attack on Italians who own grocery stores. And they were right. Because last week we did those, I can't even remember their names now. There's been so many. But we did those three families last week, and now the Chambras are attacked. Right. And so I can't blame them at all. That's got to be very scary. It's not just like, oh, the German grocery store down the road got attacked, and then the Irish bakery got attacked. These are Italian-owned grocery stores.
Focusing on that.
Exactly. And so because of this, they started banding together to help protect each other. I don't know if they were it just said they were watching out for each other at night. So I don't know if maybe they were patrolling the streets. Taking shifts. Yeah, because this is all happening at night. And they were also trying to figure out ways that they could really figure out who's committing these crimes and get to the bottom of it and catch this person. Another local Italian man, his name was Mr. Patorno. He was also an attorney, and he declared that he would offer a reward if anybody could come forward with some information. And he also said that he would work diligently to end the crime wave against the Italian colony. And so he said that he wanted to basically create a committee and appoint local Italians to tackle the crime and the Black Hand.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, so I thought that was kind of cool because, they were kind of coming together as a community and saying, hey, we gotta, let's figure this out together.
Because I'm not sure how deep the police were going after the first few leads, and then everything goes silent.
Exactly. Yeah. And, I think a lot of it came down to, oh, well, that's just Italian colony. Right. They'll figure it out. But I think also a lot of it was the time too. They didn't have DNA and all of that kind of stuff. But I do think a lot of it came down to what you said, yeah, we followed a couple leads. It's fine. Let's just move on. So I did look into it a little bit to see if I could figure out maybe what this committee's name was called or if it ever came to fruition, but I didn't find a whole lot on it. So, but it was interesting because a newspaper in New Orleans called the New Orleans Item, they put out an opinion piece regarding this whole matter. And it's interesting. I don't know. I kind of want to say that it's not written by an Italian, but they have some pretty interesting insights on how Italian communities kept to themselves and looked out for each other. So, but I'm just going to read it because it's interesting. The headline is "Who Next and When." So it's I'm like, maybe I should have named all the podcast episodes that.
Yeah.
So,
well, everybody in that neighborhood is thinking that same thing.
Exactly. When is it going to happen and who is going to be next? So it starts with, within the past 2 years, 4 Italians have been brutally murdered in this city, without a clue to the perpetrators being found. All of the victims were merchants who had prospered in a small way. All were killed in such the same manner, and while asleep. In no case was there any evidence of robbery or attempt at robbery. There was some other motive, which prompted all of the fiendish crimes. What little evidence the police have been able to gather indicates that all of them were the work of an organized gang, supposedly the Black Hand. Why have not the police been able to solve the mysteries surrounding some of these murders? The answer is easy. Those interested in having the guilty punished will not tell what they know or otherwise assist the authorities. Their mouths are closed by fear, natural resistance, or secretiveness, or through the desire to settle such troubles among themselves and in their own way. The rule of the vendetta holds sway among them here just as much as it did in their native land. Most of them still prefer private revenge to public prosecution and punishment.
Well, it's probably not an Italian writing it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it is either. I would say, though, however, that they're kind of right in a way. Because, I mean, not every Italian colony was like that, but a lot of them, especially during this time, they were very like, don't talk to the police. We'll take care of it ourselves. We don't know if we can trust the police. We don't want to cause trouble.
Right.
Like, we'll just figure out what's going on within our own community. So I thought that was kind of interesting because for not being an Italian, we're assuming, it kind of got it a little bit. Okay, so it goes on to say, if this condition is allowed to continue longer, who will be the next victim? This is the question which is now uppermost in the minds of a large portion of the Italian colony. So some of the prominent Italian citizens, as we are informed, propose to raise a fund or offer a reward to spur the detectives and police on to greater efforts in their search for the perpetrators of these crimes against members of their own nationality. This is all well enough, but not what the authorities need. What is more needed is the moral support and active assistance of the better class of Italians. Yeah, this is definitely not an Italian writing this. So just kind of thought it was interesting that somebody wrote kind of an opinion piece on that.
Yeah, they were right at the start. They're talking about how they want to put us bond together, and there's so much mistrust going on.
Exactly.
Just the way they're treated then.
It was, yeah, you can't blame them.
Because I really feel if an Italian knew something that was going to help that case, they would tell.
I do too.
But I think they're just holding back like, well, they did have a small argument. Well, this happened one time.
Exactly, where they're like, is it that big of a deal? Should I say something? Are the
police just going to jump on that and take that person in because they had a fight 2 months ago? I think that's more so what they're holding back.
I think you're right. That makes sense. If they knew, like, this guy confessed to me, I saw the bloody axe or something, they would go tell. But you're right, because they're probably feared, like, what if I say that blah, blah, blah got in an argument and then they take him and immediately give him the death sentence.
That. And that's their mistrust with the authorities.
So Johanna, she was still in the hospital. She had to have a couple of surgeries for her hip. And then, she was there. She was just recovering. Like I said, the baby was with her mom, and her mom would bring the baby down to see her. And she didn't get to go to Anthony's funeral because she couldn't get out of the hospital.
Right. It's too bad. But.
And at first, she was actually doing pretty good. Like, the doctors had high hopes for her to recover. They just thought it was going to take a while. But on Saturday, May 18th, she took a turn for the worse, and little hope was left that she would survive. And so they did another surgery on her. And so I'm not sure if she got an infection or what happened, but the next day on Sunday, May 26th, she actually passed away in the hospital.
Oh, no.
Yeah. So I almost feel like she had an infection and they didn't know maybe right away. And I don't know, but the coroner actually reported that the bullet entered her hip and went into her abdomen. So I don't know if they just thought they got the bullet.
So he found it.
Exactly. And so with her passing, this left baby Jake as the only survivor. And I know. So he would live with Johanna's parents. And also with both Anthony and Johanna deceased, no one was left to run the store. And because of that, it was auctioned off and sold on June 7th, 1912. Like the other cases, the police were left with really no solid suspects or leads. So it kind of hung in the air like Black Hand or Axeman. We don't know.
Right. Except for this one was a gun. So.
This one was a gun. So that was a very different situation. Very strange. Poor little Jake, he actually ended up passing away at the age of 9 in 1920.
Wow. Isn't that strange sometimes in this?
Yeah.
We've noticed that, the parents are deceased and the child doesn't seem to survive very long.
One of last week's episodes, it was the same thing. Yeah. And it's just, I don't know. It's just very strange. And I'm not sure what he passed away from, but just so sad. So let's dive into the next family. And that is Epifanio and Anna Andolina. And he actually went by Tony. So I'm just going to call him Tony from here on out. And he was born on December 29th, 1874 in Palermo, Sicily. And he came to America with his parents and siblings in 1891 when he was about 16. And he actually met his future wife, Anna, Sintani, and they were married on July 16th, 1899. And Anna, she was also born in Sicily around 1881, and she came to America with her family too. Tony and Anna, they went on to have 8 children together, and they also ran a grocery store. And their grocery store was said to be pretty successful. But here comes our repetitive part. Tragedy struck again. And on Saturday, December 22nd, 1917, an intruder entered the grocery store, worked his way back to where the family was sleeping, and attacked the family.
So bizarre.
So the intruder entered the home around 3 a.m. and he did this by prying a panel off the door. And that's how
First Axeman, or the first stories of Axeman.
Yep, he would pry those panels off. I think it was when Esther Albano's husband was killed.
Oh, okay.
He pried that panel off. And so that's how he entered. And then when he worked his way back to the bedroom, the intruder first struck Tony over the head 4 times with a hatchet. And Anna was in the bed next to him, and she was actually holding their infant daughter. And when Anna woke up, the intruder held a gun to her and told her to be quiet. So, I don't know.
Yeah, so this guy has a hatchet and a gun.
And he never attacked Anna or the infant. And I can't help but wonder if the infant was what saved her.
That's a good thought, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, because then he does go attack their other children here in a second. But so Anna, she just remained quiet. She watched the intruder leave, and she only started screaming when she heard him enter the bedroom of her 2 young sons and I know. She heard him attacking them, and that's when she started screaming. And the police believe that her screams actually scared off the intruder and kept him from attacking the rest of the children. So the way the house, from what I could tell, is set up, it was kind of like Anna and Tony had their bedroom and the baby was in there with them. Then the 2 oldest sons had a room together. And then the other 5 daughters were all in one room together. And so the police believed that he was kind of working his way down the rooms, but her screams were so loud that they think that scared him off.
Boy, oh boy.
So sadly, like I said, he did attack the two kids, and they were John and Salvatore. And John was only 14, and he was struck pretty bad in the head. And Salvatore, he was 18, and his arm was badly injured in the attack. And so they actually had a picture of the 2 boys and their injuries in the paper. It's not very graphic, but you can kind of see John's wound on his head.
Wonder why they felt that they had to do that.
I know.
They're kids.
They're kids, right? Yeah. And Anna said she saw the man rush out of the house, and when she saw him leave the house, she immediately went to check on her sons, who were calling out to her. I think once she kind of went into the room and saw that they were somewhat okay, then she went out to the streets and she was just screaming for help. And so the police were called to the house, and an ambulance was also sent to take Tony and the 2 boys to the hospital. And when the police searched the home for clues, they found the hatchet laying on a chair in the kitchen, and it was covered in blood and just dropped off there. Like as the guy was running out, he just dropped off the hatchet. Anna, she was only able to give a vague description. She said that the man had a dark complexion and was wearing some kind of a suit that was dark colored. She even described it as possibly being blue. And
a dress suit?
She just said some type of suit. And she also told the police that they had no enemies and nothing was stolen from the house, and that they had never received any Black Hand letters. So after talking with Johanna, the police went to the hospital to see if they could question Tony, and were actually pretty shocked when they were able to talk to Tony, because he was hit in the head 4 times. And so the police, it sounded like they were kind of like, well, we'll go see, but most likely we won't be able to. And he was fine. The doctors actually said that the wounds were not as bad as they first thought.
Wow.
Yeah, like it's just crazy. So the police were
good for Tony.
Yeah, great for Tony. Yeah. Like I said, the police were kind of shocked. They were like, "Wow, well."
Yeah, I'm sure their expectation was very low.
Yeah, because he was unconscious when they got to the house. So Tony told the police that he never saw the man since he was sleeping when he was first struck. And like I said, the first hit knocked him out. So he really wasn't able to offer any leads to the police. But Tony and the boys, they were released from the hospital, and the family, they just tried to go back to their normal day-to-day life. Anna, however, though, she was pretty traumatized from this. She was just really scared after the attack, and she hated being home alone in the house.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know how people do that.
I don't either. It's just,
I would move.
Me too. And even like not even at night, you'd be scared during the day, and especially because this person's out there continuing to do this, and
and there's no reason. But here you're always like, are they going to come back?
Yes, that would be
because they tried to kill the boys.
Exactly, and he didn't get to the other 5 girls,
right.
And you'd always have that in the back of your head. And Tony, though, he did pass away from an illness the following year, and I'm not sure if it was connected to his injuries, which that kind of happened in last week's episode too. I can't remember which family, but one of the husbands died just a short while.
Right.
And so you can't help but wonder if...
infection, whatever.
Exactly, yeah. So after his death, Anna, even though she was very scared to be in the home and in the store by herself, she actually continued to run the store for many years with the help of her children.
Well, that's good. And those older boys they were older by then now.
Exactly. And I think it was Salvador. He always seemed to be around. But she lived until 1940 when she passed away at the age of 64. So their children seemed to live pretty full and, from what I could tell, happy lives. Salvador, though, he did pass away at the age of 37. I'm not sure from what. But their second youngest daughter, her name was also Anna. She went on to become a lawyer and was one of the first 100 women in Louisiana to pass the bar and become a lawyer in the state of Louisiana.
Wow, good for her.
How cool is that? And as I was researching this family, she was in the newspaper quite a bit. So we'll have to look into doing an episode on her.
Yeah, that's quite the accomplishment.
It really is, yeah. Okay, so let's get into the last family for today's episode, and that's Joseph and Catherine Maggio. Joseph was born in Palermo, Sicily on November 22nd, 1876, and he came to America with his parents and siblings in 1892 when he was 16. And in New Orleans, he met his wife, Catherine, and the couple, they were married on December 12th, 1903. And Catherine, she actually came to America with her aunt from Italy. I'm not sure when. She was the hardest person to research in all of these. I could not find anything on her. But when her and her aunt came to America, they lived in New York City for a while. But for some reason, Catherine, she moved to New Orleans and her aunt stayed in New York City. So weird how you can find so much information on one person and hardly any on the next. So Joseph, he really wanted to own his own business, and before him and Catherine opened their grocery store, Joseph had a few bar rooms that he ran. However, these bar rooms, they seem to come with their own set of problems.
I'm sure.
Yeah, that makes sense. And in 1906, some citizens, they actually signed a petition to shut his bar down. And so there was, I don't know if it was the city council kind of thing. They had a committee, town hearing or whatever, to talk about his bar. And several local women showed up, and they really wanted Maggio's bar shut down because, they said that Maggio allowed all sorts of noises to come from the bar. There was swearing, people were singing in the streets, and the graphophone would play at all hours of the night. The committee, they actually allowed him to keep his bar, but he found himself in trouble again when he was taken to court for selling alcohol to women in 1911. And I didn't know that this wasn't allowed. I don't know if it was more of a social norm versus a law, like women should not be really in the bar drinking. I don't know, but regardless, the state...
I didn't know that neither.
Yeah, and I feel like it was more of a woman could drink at home, but in a bar, it was a little iffy. So, like I said, I didn't really spend a whole lot of time going into it. But the state ended up dropping the charges against Maggio. So I feel like there wasn't a lot of substantial for them to keep moving forward. But by 1911, Maggio, he still had his bar, but he added a grocery store, and he was running both of those. And in 1917, he got another violation for keeping the door between the grocery store and the bar open, and for allowing women to tend the bar. So they weren't allowed to be the bartender.
Yeah, so it does sound like women weren't even allowed in bars.
That's kind of what I was getting from all of that. But these charges, they were dropped as well. But all in all, the Maggio's establishment, seemed to be really well liked in the Italian colony. The grocery store was actually referred to as the store by the locals. So I think it was kind of maybe the biggest store in the area.
It was the store.
It was the store.
That might come with a lot of extracurricular things.
Yeah, exactly. If you go through that door, the store turns into the bar. And everyone called Joseph and Catherine Mr. and Mrs. Joe. So it seems like they were just really well liked in their community, except for those few women.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah. But on Thursday, May 23rd, 1918, the Maggios, they became victims just like all the other families we have talked about.
Well, here we go.
I know. Yep, get ready. So now the Maggio establishment had the grocery store, the bar, and the living quarters. But Joseph's brother Andrew, he also lived with them. And Joseph and Catherine, they didn't have any children, so it was just the three of them living in the house. Andrew, he didn't work at the store. He was actually a barber by trade. So, like I said earlier, the attacks took place on May 23rd, 1918. And that morning at 5:30 a.m., Andrew, he actually placed a call to the police stating that they need to get to the Maggio place immediately because his brother and sister-in-law had been killed. So he discovered the bodies. So when the police got to the house, they found Andrew and two of his other brothers waiting outside of the house. So it sounds like they all lived fairly close to one another, and Andrew probably went and got his brothers so that they could be with him. These are also Joseph's brothers, too.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, because Joseph and Andrew are brothers. So the police, they entered the house and found Joseph and Catherine lying in their bed, and it was very evident that they were deceased. The police noted that both of their throats were cut, and their heads were bloody and beat pretty bad. They also said that they could tell that Catherine had put her hand up in defense because her hand was sliced open. So
Andrew was sleeping there that night?
He was. He had his own bedroom. And I know where you're going with that. Like, did he not hear?
Right, because you would think that you would hear.
Yeah, and all of that will come up here pretty soon.
Oh, okay.
That's kind of our twist in the last story.
Oh.
Okay. So in a bathroom that was connected to the couple's bedroom, the police found the axe that the perpetrator used, and it was covered in blood. And this axe actually belonged to the Maggios, and it was believed that the assailant took it from their front yard and broke his way in by breaking a panel off the door like the other ones and entered in the house that way. Besides the axe, the police also noticed that a small box had been rifled through and it was on the floor. And it appeared that the box held just personal items of Joseph's, but the police weren't sure if anything was stolen from the box. The police also found a pile of bloody clothes stuffed in the corner of the room, so they were kind of assuming that the assailant changed clothes.
His clothes.
Yeah, so he wouldn't go out in the streets all bloody, I guess. And so after inspecting the house, the police questioned Andrew. And Andrew said that on Wednesday night, he got home late because he was out drinking and celebrating because he had just found out that he was accepted into the army.
Oh, so he probably just passed out.
Exactly, yeah. And so, he'd been out celebrating with his friends and came home little tipsy. And he said when he got home, Joseph and Catherine, they were actually still up, but he was so exhausted, he ended up going to bed before Joseph and Catherine. So like you said, he just kind of passed out. But around 4:30 the next morning, he heard some groans and different kind of noises coming from their bedroom. And he said he just laid there for a few minutes, like, what was that? And then he didn't hear anything after that, but something just didn't sit right with him. And he decided to get up and knock on their door. And when they didn't answer, Andrew became really worried and a little scared. So he ran down the road to get his brother Jacob. So together, once he got Jacob, they both went and got their older brother, Salvador. And the three men headed back to the house. When they got to the house, they had to break down the bedroom door. And that's when they discovered the bodies and called the police.
Oh, boy.
Yeah. So Jacob and Salvador, they corroborated Andrew's story. And all three brothers told the police that they did not believe the couple had any enemies or threats from the Black Hand, but they weren't 100% sure. So they were kind of like, not that we know of. And they said the couple were really happy and truly seemed to enjoy their lives. And like we talked about earlier, the community seemed to enjoy their establishment too. So the three brothers, they were taken to the police station and questioned for a few hours. And so after questioning the brothers, the police made a statement that they released all of the brothers, but were a bit suspicious of Andrew. They were suspicious of him because they couldn't believe that Andrew didn't hear the attacks like you were saying. Yeah. And the police also thought that it was, quote, cowardly that he had to go get his brothers to help him, which I can kind of see that point. I also am like, well, that's kind of cruel. Like, you know, some people just get more scared of certain situations than others.
Right.
And
the door being locked.
The door being locked. The police, they even inspected Andrew's clothes for blood splatter, but they didn't find anything. So later that day, the police discovered a very strange note written on the sidewalk with chalk. And yeah, this is just crazy. The message, it was not written right in front of the Maggio house. It was just a few doors down. And the message said, Mrs. Joseph Maggio is going to sit up tonight, just like Mrs. Tony. So that's strange, because if you remember back to they were both named Anthony.
Yeah, because those two Italian guys came up and called her Mrs. Tony.
Yes.
That's when Tony told her to go in the house.
Exactly. Yeah. And the neighbor lady who reported that thought that it was really strange.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
But where I get a little confused is, are they referring to Mrs. Tony as Mrs. Tony Chambra or Mrs. Tony Andalina? Because the two stories we've covered, the husbands were both named Anthony, so they probably went by Tony. So I just don't know which family they're referring to here. But I go back to that first one where they called her Mrs. Tony, because it stuck out enough to the neighbor as such a weird thing that she told the police. So I don't know. It's just, and then to be written in chalk on a sidewalk, to me, like, it's probably because I'm a teacher of elementary kids, but that's just such a childish thing to me. Like, I'm going to go right on the sidewalk with chalk, but it's just really strange. And the police thought it was extremely strange as well, and they really had no explanation. So the following day, John Frank, he was the next door neighbor to the Maggios. He called the police stating that he found a bloody razor blade stuffed in his rose terrace. So the police came down, they retrieved the razor blade, and they determined that this is what was used to cut the couple's throats. And the axe was actually used to hit them in the head, because remember I said that their throats were cut.
Oh, yeah.
And so the police at first thought that the axe was used to do all of the damage, I guess you could say. But even the coroner confirmed this later, saying, no, an axe did not do that cut on the throat. It was probably more of a razor blade. And this razor blade was very unique. It had a black and yellow handle, and it engraved on it were the words of the maker of the blade and where it was made. It was made in Germany. So with this discovery, the police really began to suspect Andrew even more, or to suspect.
Because he's a barber.
Exactly. He's a barber.
And they use those straight razors, or
like those, like
with the handle.
Yeah, I can picture the blade like popping out to do like that really clean shave. So the police, they actually took the blade to the barber shop that Andrew worked at, and another barber confirmed that the blade did belong to Andrew.
Whoa.
So this is not looking good for him at all. The other barber said that Andrew actually took the blade home the night before the murders happened so that he could, quote, have a nick honed. And I had to look that term up. You probably knew that.
Well, I know what hone is. It's sharpen, but I don't know.
See, I didn't know what honed meant. So basically it just means that the blade had some kind of a nick in it and it needs to be sharpened or smoothed out.
Okay, I
so
gotcha.
The police are like, oh my gosh, this is Andrew's razor blade. Like, how do you get around that, you know? And the police were actually also starting to believe that the bloody clothes that were left at the scene may have been Andrew's as well. They're just kind of collecting all of this information, and they're really focusing on just Andrew at this point. And I can't blame them. I
can't either.
It does not look good for him. So the funeral for Joseph and Catherine was held on Friday, and the police, they allowed Andrew to go. I did see in a couple of articles that they didn't allow Andrew to go, so I found some contradicting information there. But
they haven't arrested him.
They haven't arrested him.
So why would they be able to allow or disallow him?
Exactly. So I tend to believe that Andrew was actually allowed to go to the funeral, because even in the articles I read, it said that they hadn't even really told Andrew that he was their main suspect yet. It didn't sound like Andrew even knew about the razor blade. But the day after the funeral, the police then took Andrew to the station for questioning. So I think he went to the funeral. And later that day, they officially charged Andrew with the murder of Joseph and Catherine.
Wow.
Yeah. Andrew, he just continued to claim that he was innocent. He was almost in complete shock that he was even a suspect. He couldn't believe it. So Andrew was at the station, and he was being questioned by Superintendent Mooney. So while the police were while Mooney was questioning Andrew, there were actually police officers at the Maggio's house, and they were going through all of Andrew's belongings to see if they could find any other evidence or clues. And they actually found two peculiar things. They found a shirt that had red stains on it. It was stuffed in like a trunk of his. And they also found another razor blade that was almost identical to the razor blade that they found in the Rose Terrace. So they're going through Andrew's bedroom.
Oh, this is Andrew's stuff.
This is Andrew's stuff, yeah. So they're going through Andrew's bedroom, just trying to find other clues because that's their main suspect. And in a trunk, they find a shirt that has red stains all over it. And
has he done this before?
I don't know. And they also found a razor blade that was almost identical to the one that they found in the Rose Terrace. So for them, they were like, okay, we've got some really good evidence. Let's take this back to the police station. So they go back to the police station, and Mooney, he presented the shirt and the razor blade to Andrew. And Andrew said, yeah, that shirt's mine, and that's wine, not blood. He said that he was at his brother's wedding just a short time ago, and he had spilled wine on the shirt, and he tried to wash it and get it out, but the stains never came out. And the police even said that they could tell that somebody had tried to scrub the shirt. And so I don't know how the police did this, or, forensics was not a big thing back then. But they actually confirmed that it was wine, not blood. So They kind of ruled the shirt out. But Andrew also confirmed that this new razor blade that was found, that was his razor blade. And then they showed him the bloody razor blade, and he was like, well, that looks like mine, but that's not mine. They were not completely identical. So the razor blade that they found in Andrew's bedroom was yellow, black, and had a little bit of turquoise in it, where the one they found in the Rose Terrace was just yellow and black. Oh, okay. So Andrew's like, yeah, that one is mine, but the bloody one's not mine, which of course anybody's going to say that. So they actually took the razor blade back to the barber shop, and this time they spoke with the owner. And the owner, he looked at the two blades, and he confirmed that the bloody razor blade was not Andrew's. He had never seen that razor blade before, and he had never seen Andrew with it.
Wow, this is getting...
It's kind of weird, right?
Yeah. Why was it in his box?
Well, he's a barber.
But, I mean, the one that... Oh, the bloody one wasn't his.
The bloody one wasn't his. Yeah, so the bloody one was in the
other
Rose
one
Terrace.
Yeah. Was his. Okay.
And so with this coming to light, the police were kind of at a standstill again. They were not sure if Andrew was the murderer because they were kind of torn. They felt like they had enough evidence, and it was a lot of like, well, he says it's his blade, he says it's his blade, he says it's not his blade. So it's just not very strong evidence, but I think in their gut, they still suspected Andrew. But they couldn't hold him on anything, and they let him go. I just want to read this really quick because Andrew, he told the police, when they were questioning him, he was just so shocked that he was a suspect. And he said, "How could you think I would ever have the heart to kill my brother? When my father died in Sicily, it was Joe who sent us the money to come to America, and Joe who supported us until we could earn our own living. Why, my brother's been more than a father to me. He had raised me from the time I was 11 years old. I know a man isn't supposed to cry, but..." And then Maggio broke down completely at that point. So, I don't know. It's kind of weird. I can definitely see why the police honed in on Andrew. It makes total sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So, like I said, though, the police, they released him that same day. So he was arrested, booked for murder charges, and released the same day. Like, what a whirlwind. Superintendent Mooney, he said that the case had taken a few peculiar turns.
I agree.
Me too. But that they were just going to continue to work hard on finding suspects. And like all the other cases we've discussed, this went cold as well. So these poor families, I mean, it must just be so devastating every single time where they're like, we don't have anything. We don't know.
On this one, it seems like there was a lot of evidence left behind.
There was.
The clothing, the razor blade.
The axe.
Yeah.
And the hatchet in the other one.
Right. I don't know. You would think they could match up the clothing with somebody.
Somebody, exactly. Well, it was really interesting because, and I didn't add this in because I didn't know what to make of it. I saw in one article where the police reported that they felt like the bloody clothes that were in a pile on the floor belonged to Joseph. But I'm like, how would it belong to Joseph? Unless, this is the only thing that I could think of, unless the assailant broke in, changed out of his own clothes, put Joseph's clothes on, then committed the murders, then took off Joseph's clothes and put his own clothes back on. But that's a lot of work.
Knowing that there's somebody else in the house.
Exactly.
Yeah, I don't...
We also have to remember it's 1918 too.
That's true.
So poor Andrew, he actually was arrested just a couple of months later after the attacks. One Sunday, he was working at the barber shop. Sadly, the army fell through. He didn't end up joining the army. I don't know. Oh,
that's right.
Yeah, I don't know if that was his doing or the army's doing, but anyways, he was working in the barber shop on a Sunday and he was giving 2 soldiers a shave. And the city of New Orleans had just passed a law stating that barbershops needed to be closed on Sundays. And so he's in there giving them a shave and 2 police officers walk by and see what's going on and arrest poor Andrew.
What's the big deal of a barber shop closing and they don't serve alcohol or anything?
No, exactly. I thought that was really weird. They called it the Sunday law or something. So I don't know if maybe it was barbershops, bars, maybe it was a bunch of stuff, but...
Wonder if it was the fact that nobody works, you should be at church?
True.
Could be something like that.
That could be. Maybe they were seeing like a decline in church attendance or something, and they were like, nobody's getting a haircut today. It's the Lord's Day. So I don't know, but I do think that the charges were dropped, and Andrew, he didn't lose his license or anything because he would go on to work as a barber for the rest of his life. So he also went on to marry and had 4 children. And when his first son was born, he named his son Joseph after his brother. So
that's cool.
Yeah. He passed away in 1942 at the age of 52. And I found a really cool picture of Andrew standing in front of the barbershop that he worked at. And so I'll post that on the Instagram page.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So tried to leave it on a little bit of a happier note this time because we are at the end of our episode. So there we go. There's 3 more families that were unfortunately possible victims of the Axeman.
And still... no results.
No results. Yep, exactly. So next week we'll dive into the rest of the victims, and we're also going to discuss a horrible Piggly Wiggly ad that we found in the New Orleans newspaper. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, that's bizarre.
Mom and I were like, what in the world is happening here? Funny.
Piggly Wiggly's a store. Grocery store.
A grocery store, yeah. I think it's kind of funny. We started this episode off talking about how all these stories are the same and they're so repetitive. And these 3 were actually had a little bit of different stuff in them.
Right. I know. And we focused on that.
We did. And it's like, we also knew what was coming. And we're like, these are all the same. They're so repetitive. And these actually had some twists in there.
Right.
But overall, you can see the general themes reoccurring over and over. So
Italian grocery.
Exactly. The panels, the axes, all that stuff. So we will pick it back up again next week. And we hope you enjoyed listening to these sad stories. And we hope you come back to listen to more stories about Italian Americans. See you next time.
See you next time.